everyone, welcome back to another video. It is Saturday night and I keep watching YouTube videos and podcasts and looking at Twitter out there, and no one will stop talking about GameStop and Wall Street Bets. So I figure why not just create a little programming video, a tutorial video on how to use Wall Street Bets data. So as you know by now, Wall Street Bets is a large community of millions of retail investors, and in the past, Wall Street and the big institutions have laughed at the retail investors, saying, "Oh, those guys don't know anything. They don't know how to make decisions or invest for themselves." And communities like Wall Street Bets have gradually grown over time and gained more and more power to the point where they've had the ability to move a stock and pretty much bankrupt a large institution. So as you can probably imagine, many people are going to this data and scraping it at this point, analyzing the data, and Wall Street has to pay attention to communities like Wall Street Bets. And I figured since I'm stuck in on a Saturday night and didn't really have anything planned, why not make another video? And so I have my Twitter feed up here, and you see on January 3rd how I mentioned Dogecoin and silver miners, which are now very recently a very hot topic again. And so let's talk about how we analyze these cash tags and see if we can take some of these out of a feed from social media. And we're going to use the example of Wall Street Bets in this particular case, and see what people are talking about right now other than GameStop and AMC. So let's go ahead and get started with the tutorial. So as you may have guessed, Reddit does have an API here which has some endpoints that you can use to access data like your own profile, collections, your different posts, comments. There's a whole lot of things you can do with this Reddit API. And so when you download like the Reddit app or Alien Blue, Reddit is fun. There's a variety of mobile apps out there that consume the Reddit API in order to create their own user interfaces on top of Reddit. But there has been some other spin-off projects. One of them is called PushShift here, PushShift.io, and someone, I don't know the whole history, but someone led a development project to archive and organize and store all of the different Reddit posts and comments and submissions, and they have some data visualization here and an API and data sets, and they make it easily searchable from this interface. And so what we're going to do today is use PushShift and the API that they provide, along with this nice handy wrapper or Python package for it called PSAW, so the Python PushShift.io API wrapper, and we're going to use this to search and categorize and find Wall Street Bets posts that mention stocks, and then we're going to use Postgres and SQL to analyze this data and see how the mentions of these stocks are currently trending, what's most popular, what are people talking about the most, and maybe we can get to using some analytics functions to detect different trends and see if those things are useful. So kind of a bonus use of Postgres and Timescale DB that we're getting into now that I didn't plan before, but I just make these when I feel like it and freestyle it. So let's go ahead and get rolling with this. So I have my Visual Studio Code, and the reason I brought up PSAW is we need to install this as a dependency. So I'm going to put PSAW in here in the requirements, and I'm going to create a new file. So I'm going to call it search WSB.py, and I can run it, right? And I can try to import PSAW, and I already have it, right? But if you don't have it, you can install it. So you can do pip3 install PSAW, or install all of the requirements that we have in this file. So you could do pip3 install -r requirements text, okay? And so PSAW is the Python package we're going to use, and that's why I'm including it. And we also need to include psychopg2 if you don't have it already, because I am also going to access the database that has the database of stocks that we have in Postgres with Timescale DB already. And so this class has a prerequisite. So if you don't know anything about databases, I just did a bunch of videos on SQL databases and creating tables. And so you want to catch up to the class here, where we're focusing on uses of Postgres. And so if you haven't done that stuff already, you should be up and running with a Postgres instance and have a stock table loaded already and populated so that we can use it, because we're going to reference that in our Reddit mentions a table in a moment. But if you just want to watch to see how you would do this, then that's okay as well. But if you want to code this, there's some prerequisites. So what I'm going to do now is figure out how to use this Python push-shift API wrapper to search Reddit comments. We have the Python package installed, and if you scroll down, there's a little hello world example. So we can copy this demo usage, and you'll see, I'll put that at the top of my search wsb.py. We got from psaw import push-shift API, and we instantiate this little API client here. And what that allows us to do is it gives us some functions, so methods that we can call that just do basic stuff like searching submissions. And so they have a few examples that are useful to us here. So this one is the first 10 submissions to our politics in 2017, filtering down the results to URL, author, title, and subreddit fields. And that's pretty close to what we're doing. So let's just take this little example and modify it to meet our needs. Okay, so they're importing date time. So I'm going to import date time. I'm going to change a little bit to do it how I normally do it. So I just import date time. And you see they have this start epoch, or epoch, however you say it, which is just a Unix timestamp. So it's just an integer that represents a moment in time, right? And so they're searching for submissions that occur after that timestamp. And so I'm just going to call it start time for simplicity, since it's easy to pronounce for me. So start time equals, and then I'm going to do date time dot date time. And let's do, instead of 2017, let's do today, which is 2021, and it's the 30th. Dot timestamp, so we get this nice integer timestamp, and we can pass this over. So we can say we have our API, we have API.search submissions, and we want the ones after the start time. The subreddit we want is WallStreetBets, and the fields we want are URL, author, title, and subreddit. That sounds pretty good. That's all we really need. And the limit, we'll just limit it at 10 for now. And you see they cast this result to a list. And so let's go ahead and just store this list in a variable. So I'll just call it submissions, and we'll say submissions equals list, API search submissions, right? And so if I print that out, you should see some values if we did it right. So we inserted it, and I didn't print it yet, so I'll print it. Okay, if I print this, let's see what happens. Do we get 10 posts? Wait a few seconds, and there you go. So we have some posts that came in, and let's see, does this look like the right thing? Yep, this looks like the type of things they'd say on WallStreetBets. So they're talking about Robinhood, they're talking about small TA on GME and why there's strong evidence of an upward spike, and so forth. So yeah, WallStreetBets, and that's some data. And so what we can do is just loop over it. So I'll do for submission in submissions, let's print a submission so we can get them on a single line. And you can see, expand it a little more, a little easier to read. Yep, and someone said I couldn't buy any more Doge. Yep, definitely WallStreetBets. So we got that, and yeah, we can capture this to a file if we want, so I can run the same command. I can redirect the output to wsb.text, and it'll make a file here. And you see I just have 10, exactly 10 submissions. You see our authors, the subreddit, and so forth, created UTC and all that sort of thing. So yeah, let's take that created UTC. That'll be useful. So let's make notes of the things we care about. So I got submission.created UTC, submission.title, and submission.url. So I'll get those and print those out. So print submission created UTC, print submission.title, and print submission.url instead. Okay, instead of the whole submission. Let's just get just the fields I need. And there you go, just like that. You're connected to Reddit, you're connected to a subreddit, and you can get posts and see what are in them. So let's modify this a little bit more. I don't just want 10, I want a lot of them. I want every single one from January 30th of 2021. I want to see what everyone talked about today and see if we can find anything interesting in there. And so I'm going to do that and run this. And here is one note on this. So you see how we cast to a list. What this does when you cast this to a list, this is actually a generator that it returns, and this list makes it into a list object. But since this is going to return tens of thousands of submissions now, We don't want to wait and get all those back and just return a final list. This generator object allows us to page through them like 10 at a time or 20 at a time, since you're not going to get 30,000 results back in a single HTTP request. And so what PushShift does is provide these generator objects here, and this lets you loop over these submissions, and it'll handle pagination for you, and it'll also handle API throttling. So the Reddit API will probably throttle, or the PushShift API will throttle, so you don't hit it a million times a second, and this will automatically handle that for you and just delay it somewhat. So it has this exponential back off built in. So if you get a 429 HTTP error, then it'll wait a few seconds before it tries again and to get more data. And so this that just controls the traffic or the load on the site. Okay, so I got that. Submissions equals API search submissions, and we're getting those. And now you'll see when we loop through them, it's actually going to make a request. It's going to keep paginating through, and we can just have this go on and on forever until the very end. So we're getting data coming in, and you see some cache tags here that we're going to look at. And so let's filter this down a little bit more. Let's just get the records that have these cache tags like GME, $GME, and $AMC in them. And so to get that, we have these sentences, and what we can do is split the sentences into words. So I can say words equals submission.title.split, and by default Python splits on the space, so I don't need to give it a delimiter. And if I print the words, right, words for each of the titles, you'll see now you see a sentence at a time as a list, right? And you can see, can we get a GME and AMC hype vid prior to the Monday open? So everyone's still in on the GME thing talking about it, but we're going to look for other things as well, right? And so how do we get the cache tags in here? This is just every single post for today. How do we get the ones that just mention particular stocks? And how do we look at these cache tags? So let's try to filter out posts that mention particular stocks. And so I'll do cache tags equals, and I'm going to do list and set and filter, and I'm going to chain a lot of things together. I don't normally do this on the channel, but I'm going to try to get a little more advanced over time. So I'm going to do lambda word.lower dot starts with $. Okay, and then I'm going to do comma words. And what is this doing? It's all an inline function, and so I have this list, and what I can do is say use filter to filter down that list to only items in the list that match a certain criteria, right? And so I'm using this lambda function, which is just an inline function, and I'm calling out on words. And so for each item in words, I'm going to get a variable called word, and I'm only going to return it in this cache tags list if the lowercase of the word starts with a $, okay? So if it starts with a $. Okay, and then so these are the only ones that have cache tags, and then I'm going to say if there's no cache tags in it, this is going to be an empty list. So I'll say if length of cache tags is greater than 0, so if it has some cache tags, then we'll print the submission.title. Okay, and let's see what those look like. Or we can let's print the cache tags first. Cache tags, oh, and yeah, let's go ahead and print these as well. Okay, so let's see how that all looks. So I'll print the title and the cache tags that are present in that title. Okay, so I run it, and there you go. So now you see, hoo-ha, seems like you'd like to ride GME to the moon with me, pretty mama. And so $GME, lots of GME mentions. You see there's some false alarms here, like $500, but since we have a stock database, we can map these symbols to stocks that actually exist. So we'll do a little data check first before we assume that it's a stock and check it against a valid list. And so actually, if you don't care about databases or further analysis within a database, this is a pretty good tutorial from you. You've seen how to access the Reddit API and find posts that mention a particular stock on a certain date, and you can go further with it. But since I'm in the middle of a tutorial on time series databases, TimescaleDB, and Postgres, we're going to use the tables that we have available and use those relationships and run SQL queries against this data. So let's go ahead and get started with that part. I'm going to create a new SQL file, so I'm going to call it create tables.sql, and I'll paste those over. And just to remind you, we had a stock and stock price table and an ETF holding table in our tutorial on tracking the ARK Invest ETFs. And this is our stock table. So what we want to do is map, we're going to store all these mentions of stocks that come from the Reddit API. We're going to store them in a local table, and that table is going to reference a stock in our stock table, and then we can run some SQL queries to see which of these stock symbols is mentioned the most on WallStreetBets subreddit. So what I will do here now is I'm going to add an extra table that we didn't have before, and so I'm going to call it mention. When someone mentions a particular stock. So that's my mention table. And then we need to think about what that needs. Here we go. So I have a mention table, and it's going to reference the stock table. So I need a foreign key here. So this stock ID is going to reference the one in the stock table. So that's going to be an integer. Okay. And I'm going to add a timestamp so that we have a timestamp field. Right. So DT timestamp without time zone. Not null. Okay. And then we're also going to store the message, like what is the title. We'll just store the title of the Reddit post so far, and we can adjust this as needed. So just for simplicity, I'm just going to look at the titles of the posts. Then I'm going to store the source of the mention. And so one nice thing here, there's a variety of places that stocks are mentioned, not just Reddit and WallStreetBets. People mention stocks on Twitter using the cashtags, so they embed the stock symbol inside of Twitter. But this is also used on stock twits, and other places are starting to adopt this standard more and more. And what's nice about that, it gives us a clear way to delineate when it's a post about stocks, and it makes it much easier for us to parse the stock symbol out of the text. And so the source here, we can record that this is from WallStreetBets, but we could expand this table and have other sources. So I could store, say the source is WallStreetBets, the source is Twitter, the source is stock twits, or some website, right? So you can have a variety of categories here. So we want the source of the mention, the title, and we'll just store the URL as well. So the URL, so that we can link to the mention if we want to read the actual post, right? And then we also will create a primary key field, and that's going to be a combination of the stock ID and the date time when it was mentioned. So compound primary key right there. And then we can do a foreign key constraint. And so I'll do foreign key mention stock, and let's say that's a foreign key stock ID, and that references a stock ID. And then I will also create an index. So I'm going to create an index on mention and do that for stock ID and date time descending. And I will run select create hypertable mention and date time. So now that we've written the SQL that we'll need to create the table, let's actually run these queries. So I can go back to my command line. So I have Postgres open already. You can open it if you haven't already. And I also have this tables plus here that I can use, and I can just execute and run these queries. So you can put them in either place and execute them. And I did that a moment ago just to test out my SQL. And so I have this mention table already. And now we need to put both of these pieces together. So let's take the part that grabs data out of Reddit and prints it out and accesses all the attributes in a list. And let's loop through all of those mentions that mention the cache tag and insert them all into this mention table as we go. So, and then once we insert them into this database, we can also map the mentions here to the stocks that we have in our stock table and run some queries and get some counts and run some statistics on them. So got our mention table created. Let's go back to our Python script and have it query our database. So I'm back in Visual Studio Code, and so we're going to get our code from the previous video. And so we'll have a config.py, and since I've already put this in the GitHub page, you can just copy this from over there. But in config.py, we have a few settings to connect to our database. You can review previous videos if you want to keep doing this, or take the code from github.com/hackingthemarkets. So I'm going to borrow some code instead of reinventing the wheel. So I'm going to copy this over here, and then we import psychopg2 and psychopg extras. So I'm going to copy that part from GitHub. So if you don't have the code, let me go ahead and show you where it is and where you can copy it from. So we have GitHub Hacking the Markets. Follow along for the many projects that I post on here. We have the ARC Funds tracker already, and in that one we built the database. So we have this config file, this config.py here. You can get the information from there. And I'm also copying a little bit from like populate stocks, for instance. So we imported psychopg2, and then we can set up this database cursor that we need, so we can get it from there. So I'll get it from here as well. So we'll get that. So I'm going to import psychopg2, psychopg extras, and I'm going to import the config file that I just created. Okay, so I have a config.py, has my database connection information. We have our database connection. We use our config, the host name, database name, user, and password that are in our config file. We've already talked about that. And we're going to create a cursor, a dictionary cursor, so that we can loop through query results as a dictionary. Okay, so the first thing I'll do, so let's just get a mapping of the stock symbols to stock IDs. So I'll do cursor.execute. Okay, so I'm going to execute, and I'm going to select star. Let's just select star from stock, and I'll say rows equals cursor.fetch all. Okay, and then I'll make a new stock dictionary called stocks equals, and in this dictionary, what I want to do is have a lookup, so I can look up a stock symbol in a dictionary and map that to an actual stock ID. Okay, so I'm going to do for row in rows, I'm going to say stocks $, and I'll talk about why I'm doing it this way in a second. You can probably figure it out. $ plus a row symbol. Okay, so I'm accessing each row as a dictionary, so I have a symbol, and then I also can say that equals a row ID. And first of all, before I even do this, let me go ahead and just print the rows first, make sure you can connect to the database. You're gonna have to debug that, and let's see if I have my database connection. Run that. Okay, it's doing a bunch of stuff, so it kept going. So let me comment this stuff out briefly, and then I'll put it back because I want to do the rest of this. Okay, I'll do that, and let's just make sure we can get our rows from our database. So you see that we got a bunch of stock rows that we've already populated. Okay, and then let's comment this part out, and let's build a dictionary out of it. So now let's print this stocks dictionary. So you see I get my database records out, and then for each one of these, I'm just building up this dictionary, right? And then at the very end here, I'll print my stock dictionary. And look at that, you see what we have here? This dictionary has a key, so $argg, and then the value for that key is 7312. And so we just have this big mapping of stock symbol cache tags to stock ID. And as you may have guessed, as we're looping through these submissions here, so we get our push shift API back here, and then we have this mapping. And so now as we're looping through this, we know our cache tags, and then for each one we can look up what the stock ID is, right? And we insert the stock ID and as a mention in our mentions table. So now we just need to write some insert queries. And so I'm going to, in my loop here, I'm going to do cursor.execute, and I'm going to insert into a mention. And we have a number of fields defined: date, time, stock ID, message, source, and URL. So if I connect to my ETF database here, and I describe the mention table, right, we have stock ID, date, time, message, source, and URL. So we need all those fields, which we do. And what are we inserting into them? We're going to do some placeholders here. So I'll do some placeholders. And the source, I'll put WallStreetBets, and a placeholder for the URL, and let's pass it in our Reddit post. So I need the timestamp. So I have the UTC time, created UTC. And I did this as a date time format, so we're going to quickly convert it. And I'm going to just type out what this is. I have a full stack tutorial that talks about date time a lot, and I don't want to go over all that right now, so you can review your date time functions if you want, but we're converting a Unix timestamp, which is an integer, to a standard ISO format timestamp, which is like 2020-0101- hour, minute, second with colons in it or something like that. So I'm going to do datetime.datetime from timestamp, and then I'm going to do submission.created@. And let me store this outside just so that's not so much data in here. So I'm going to do dt or post time equals, just like that. So I'm going to do how about submitted time equals datetime.datetime from timestamp. So we're converted submission.created utc.iso format. So a bunch of functions here just to get a regular date time function here. We should have a database cursor, so that looks good. And then let's do, so we have some placeholders here. We need a date time, which is this submitted time. We need a stock ID. So our stock ID, right, we're looping through all of the cache tags. So we'll do for cache tag in cache tags. We can get the submitted time for each of those. So we're going to record the submitted time, and then we're going to look up the stock ID from here, right? We have a cache tag mapping to a stock ID. And so if it was $AMC, we'd find this in this dictionary. And so we'd have stocks, and then we have cache tag as the key to look up and find the stock ID that we're looking for. And then we have the message, which is the submission.title. So we just grab that from up there. Okay, we have the submission title, and then submission.source. We already have that filled in. And then we need the submission.url. So we have 4 placeholders. WallStreetBets is going to be the same every time, and then 4 values to insert in those placeholders. And that's an insert, right? And then we can commit. We can do connection.commit and commit each of those to our database. And you're going to see what happens. And just to save some time, what will actually happen is there might be a duplicate timestamp, and we can wrap this in a try catch block or a try except. Okay, and so if something goes wrong with inserting this record, we can catch the error and do accept exception as E. Okay, and then we can just print what the exception is, and we'll just roll back our transaction. Okay, and so now I'll run this and see what it does, and let it run for a while. Okay, and you see how I did catch some exceptions, but also looks like I'm still printing out some data. But it's getting through, and then you'll see an exception every once in a while with a duplicate key. And so there are cases when a stock got mentioned multiple times, I guess in the same second. So there are some duplicates in here. But if I go ahead and let this run through for a little bit, we end up with a table here that's populated. Okay, so I'm going to browse this guy, and let's see what it looks like. And look at that, we have a stock ID, we have a date time, and we have a message, a source, and a URL, and we have a nice populated database with a bunch of timestamps here, which is pretty cool. And that's kind of cool. I'm using this browser, and I can see all the rockets and diamond hands and things like that, which is pretty fun. So yeah, let's see what we can find in here. Is there any interesting symbols that are being mentioned a lot right now? And so I can select all my stocks, or I can write another query. So let's see. We can select count star. Let's just see how many there are first. So select count star from mention. Ooh, getting late, slowing down. Yep. And it looks like I have 2,079 mentions that had cache tags in them. And then I can do another query. Let's see, we can do select count star as number of mentions from mention, and I'm going to group by stock ID. Okay, and then I'll do comma stock ID. And so we can see the number of mentions next to the stock ID. So if I run that, you see a number of mentions, stock ID, and we can see there's counts of each one. So let's try to figure out which stock it is. So what I can do is add a join, right? So stock ID is in the mention table and stock is in this other table, right? And we have the name in there. So I can do mention join stock on mention, or join stock on stock.id equals mention dot stock ID. Again, if you want to know more about SQL joins, you can review the full stack app tutorial where I talk about SQL for 5 lessons and talk about database joins. So I join on that, and then that'll give me access to the attributes in the stock table. So at that point, I can do comma stock or comma symbol because it's present in the stock table, and then I can run this. And it says stock symbol must appear in the group by clause. So I'll do group by symbol. Okay. And so I'm selecting all the count stars for each symbol. So I'm grouping the counts by symbol. Okay. So I do that. And then now you see some stock symbol names next to each of these mentions and stock ID pairs. And so now let's do an order by. So we can do an order by to see which one is mentioned the most. So order by, and then we can order by the number of mentions. Okay. Group by, and we want the order at the end here. So the order of these is group by, then order by. So I run that. We got a bunch of number of mentions. It looks like I should order by descending. Okay, so I order by descending, and we'll see what's matched the most. So I'll run that, and as expected, GameStop is the top match stock, AMC is the second, BlackBerry is the third, Nokia is the fourth, and what's one that people are just now starting to talk about? SLV, which is the silver ETF, and that was mentioned 62 times in the data set that I'm looking now. That happened today, so be on lookout. Let's see what happens to silver. I heard some Redditors are buying physical silver right now, and I got some right there, so I'm ready to go, and we'll see what happens with silver. So if you go to Twitter right now and you look for silver, there's a silver squeeze hashtag trending right now of Redditors trying to see a short squeeze in silver stocks, and I think some are even buying physical silver right now and trying to corner the market on silver, which is a gigantic market, so it's kind of crazy. I don't even know if that's possible, but what is possible is individual stock tickers. So there's some heavily shorted silver names. So I had mentioned a lot of the junior silver miners earlier that were set up pretty well. So you have Endeavor Silver, watch Dollar AG. I think that's a big target right now. So we have this AG stock. It's Majestic Silver. And it's funny because I'm remembering a lot of these names from like 2011 if you're looking at stocks in 2011. But if you look at the chart of the silver miners for 2011, or back here, if you look at precious metals in general, right, in 2011, there was a pretty big bubble there. And so what's a good name? Pan American Silver, for instance. So if I look back at Pan American Silver stock, and I remember at that time, and you see what happened. There was a financial crisis, and there was a huge melt up for several years in silver like that. And then same with ag stock, right? And you see, actually it's starting to squeeze up already. So you see silver stocks like this spiked way the hell up there. So this went from like $1 to $20, and they're trying to do the same thing right now. So you see this setup. It looked like silver bottomed. And that's why I was originally looking at this chart, because in early 2021, because it looked like silver was breaking above this high. And you see now that it has, and this stock has high short interest, people are really going after that. So silver, and that explains the intro for the video. And it's getting late and I'm pretty tired. It's like 1 o'clock in the morning. So that's it for now. I hope you liked the video. We pulled data from a subreddit using a Python package, and we looked through all those messages and found any cache tags to find mentions of a particular stock, and we grabbed all those and we stored that in a new table that we created in PostgreSQL, and we ran a couple queries here just to see which stocks are being mentioned the most in the last 24 hours, and we found silver here, and you can look through NAKD Ag, which is Majestic Silver, American Airlines, Fubo, and so you see this trend of a lot of PSLV, a lot of stocks that are shorted a lot. People are just saying, what's the next one? Can we cause another short squeeze? And so, yeah, very interesting times. Let's see what happens. I can't wait to see what happens next week with all these attempts to cause short squeezes. It's going to be crazy. So thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next video. We'll add on to all of this. I'm going to continue. I know everything so far has just been standard SQL stuff with Postgres, but I promise we're going to dive deeper into deeper analytics functions and more features that are actually timescale DB specific. So hope you like this. See you next time. Bye.
Here in my garage, I don't have a car. I mostly just walk around everywhere or ride my bicycle. But what I do have is this book on Python for data analysis.